Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you were sitting down in front of a blank 100 by 70 centimeter canvas,
Right.
and you're just staring at that sheer white surface, the psychological barrier can be immense.
Oh, absolutely. It's terrifying.
Right. So our mission today is to demystify something that feels genuinely impossible when you're staring at that empty space.
Mm.
We're talking about capturing the infinite, chaotic reality of the sky, translating the shifting physics of light, atmospheric depth, suspended vapor, all onto a flat, two-dimensional plane.
It is a massive challenge.
Yeah, it really is. So we're going to break down a masterful, step-by-step, professional method so that you can understand the hidden mechanics behind a breathtaking painting. And the materials guiding our exploration today come from a spectacular curriculum provided by Grupo RAIIM.
Yes.
It features the work of the great artist, Laura Palacios. And I want to be clear, this isn't just, a list of mechanical tips to memorize.
No, not at all.
We are exploring the rigorous process of how a master actively translates optical reality into physical layers of paint.
It is a pleasure to dive into this material with you because looking at this through the lens of an art specialist and educator, what stands out immediately in the curriculum is the sheer intentionality of it all.
Yeah, nothing feels accidental.
Exactly. The process taught by the master is completely devoid of guesswork. Every single action, every color choice, every tool has a very specific optical purpose.
Which is so refreshing to see.
It is, and to truly understand how this method functions, I think it helps to frame it using a musical analogy.
Okay, I like that.
Think of this entire process as a symphony of perception. Every brushstroke is a deliberate note in a complex chord layered over time to compose light itself.
I think that framing is incredibly useful because it forces us to look past the surface image and think about the foundational frequencies.
Precisely.
And that becomes obvious right at the very beginning of the process. Because intuition dictates that if you're painting a realistic blue sky, you just grab the cooler pigments.
You're great for the blue.
Yeah, and you start applying them directly to the pristine canvas. But Laura Palacios does something completely counterintuitive.
She does.
She covers the entire surface with a completely even, brushstroke-free layer of Naples Yellow using a sponge, setting out to paint a cool, expansive sky by turning the entire surface a warm, creamy yellow. Seems like an aggressive contradiction.
What's fascinating here is how that initial layer actively manipulates human perception later in the process.
How so?
Well, if you follow that initial intuition and apply high chroma blue paint directly onto a stark white gessoed canvas, you inevitably run into a classic amateur error.
The flat sky.
The flat sky. The resulting sky looks profoundly artificial. It takes on this sterile, almost plastic quality because pure blue over white lacks internal temperature variation.
Right.
It's just too visually clean to represent actual atmosphere.
It creates a surface that feels synthetic, like a Pantone swatch rather than breathable air.
Exactly that. So, leaning into our musical parallel, because yellow and blue sit opposite each other on the color wheel, establishing that even layer of Naples Yellow acts like a deep, humming bass line beneath the composition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When the cooler blue tones are applied over it later, that warm bass fundamentally alters the behavior of the blue.
It tames it.
Exactly. It neutralizes the shrillness of the pure pigment, giving the sky an internal vibrating warmth. The master is essentially solving the problem of temperature and depth before the actual subject is even painted.
You are setting a foundational frequency that dictates how everything else will behave. I love that. So once that base is established and fully dry, the curriculum moves into the actual ascension of the atmosphere.
Yes, the gradient.
And what struck me is how highly structured this phase is. She uses a ruler, a pencil, masking tape to protect the lower half of the canvas, completely isolating the sky region.
It's very controlled.
Very. Then she works strictly from the bottom up, mirroring our physical experience of looking toward the zenith. The gradient begins at the horizon with a warm cream that's white mixed with yellow ochre, shifts into a cyan, and then peaks at the very top with a deep cobalt blue.
It is a methodical mapping of value and temperature. As the eye moves further from the Earth's surface, the atmosphere thins, allowing those deeper, cooler frequencies of space to become visible.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
When you review the process provided by Grupo RAIIM, you catch the master's unexpected trick for stabilizing that blue gradient.
Oh, the raw umber.
Yes, into that blend of cyan and cobalt. She introduces a microscopic pinch of raw umber.
Yeah.
She is taking a high chroma blue and deliberately injecting a brown earth tone into it.
That decision to introduce raw umber is a brilliant observation of the physical world. We often default to conceptualizing the sky as a transparent vacuum,
Right, like empty space.
but it isn't. It is actually a dense soup of particulate matter. We are looking through humidity, dust, and atmospheric interference. By pulling an earth tone into the highest points of the sky, she slightly desaturates the chroma.
She's acknowledging the mass of the air. Because if you leave that blue at maximum saturation without the umber, you risk creating a sky that looks like a digital rendering.
It loses its connection to the physical environment.
Right, grounding the ethereal blues with a literal earth tone forces the sky to inhabit the same physical reality as the landscape that will eventually sit beneath it.
And achieving that grounded reality sets the stage for the next critical phase, which is introducing the sunlight.
Yes.
But the methodology here requires immense patience. The canvas must be bone dry. The curriculum highlights Laura Palacios using a hairdryer to aggressively cure the surface, ensuring there is zero moisture left in that gradient.
Why is that so crucial?
Because only then does she apply veladuras, or glazes, of permanent golden, yellow, and orange using a synthetic brush.
Right. And for those analyzing the technique, the distinction between direct physical mixing and optical mixing via glazes is paramount here.
It's everything.
A glaze relies on heavily diluting the pigment with a medium until it is a transparent film. Because the gradient underneath is completely cured, she avoids physically blending the yellow into the blue.
Which is the only way to avoid completely collapsing the color structure.
Because yellow and blue make green.
Exactly. If you attempt to capture sunlight by blending wet yellow and orange into wet cyan, you destroy the value structure and generate a muddy, desaturated mess.
Nobody wants a green sky.
No, they don't. Returning to the musical analogy one last time, a glaze is like layering a delicate vocal harmony over a fully mixed track.
Oh, that's good.
The light from the room physically passes through that transparent layer of golden yellow, strikes the opaque blue beneath, and bounces back out to the viewer.
It's a structural manipulation of light. It traps the luminosity between layers, creating a glowing effect that direct, opaque painting simply cannot replicate.
It's truly luminous.
You are essentially building a stained glass window over the atmosphere. Which brings us to what might be the most daunting aspect of the entire piece.
The clouds.
The clouds. They are inherently chaotic, shifting forms. And the curriculum explicitly warns against the most common pitfall here.
The cotton ball effect.
Yes. The urge to load a brush with pure, opaque white and just dab it onto the canvas. It results in these floating, disconnected shapes that look like stickers applied to the surface.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason those floating shapes fail is that they ignore the volumetric reality of a cloud.
Right.
A cloud isn't just a white wisp. It is an immensely heavy, three-dimensional mass holding thousands of gallons of water.
It has serious weight.
Exactly. The great artist controls this chaos by establishing the volume through shadow first, completely ignoring the highlight.
That's so backwards how most people think.
It is. She utilizes a dark mix of Payne's gray, cobalt, white, and a touch of raw umber, employing a sponge to smudge in the heavy bellies of the cloud formations.
She is finding the structure in the darkness. You have to carve out the mass before you have the right to introduce the light. And when she finally does address the highlights, the curriculum points out a strict rule. The highlight is never pure white.
Never. Using pure white in a realistic atmospheric rendering is incredibly disruptive to the value hierarchy. Pure white represents the absolute peak of the value scale.
Right.
If you drop it onto the canvas, it functions as a visual whole. It immediately breaks the harmony of the surrounding temperatures and jumps out of the composition entirely.
So what does she use instead?
By substituting pure white with the warm cream used near the horizon, Laura Palacios ensures that the illuminated edges of the clouds remain strictly governed by the warm ambient light established during the glazing process.
The highlight has to belong to the environment it sits within. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And she pushes the volume even further in the final pass of the clouds.
The shadows.
Yeah. She takes Prussian blue, heavily dilutes it with a glazing medium, and uses that transparent shadow to deepen the undersides of the masses.
It's a gorgeous color.
It really is. Prussian blue has an incredibly deep, almost violet value range. Using it transparently perfectly mimics the optical reality of translucent water vapor holding back the sunlight. You aren't painting a solid rock. You are painting suspended humidity.
It's an elegant solution to rendering weight without losing atmospheric transparency. At this point, the sky possesses immense depth and volume, but it requires grounding.
Right, the Earth.
The process now forces us to shift our attention to the lower half of the canvas, the land. And the methodology here completely inverts the logic we just spent so much time establishing for the sky.
It's a total flip.
It is. Rather than working from light to dark and bottom to top, the landscape is constructed from dark to light, moving from the furthest background directly into the immediate foreground.
That inversion is vital for establishing the spatial relationships. She lays in the distant horizon using the darkest values on the palette, Raw Umber and Payne's Gray. It creates a solid, heavy anchor for that massive sky to sit upon. But what really caught my attention when studying the curriculum from Grupo RAIIM was the specific selection of tools for this phase.
The brushes.
Yeah, she abandons the smooth synthetic brushes and brings in a comb brush with its separated raked bristles and a coarse, thick bristle brush.
It is a masterclass in letting the tool dictate the texture.
Yeah.
When rendering complex, distant vegetation, the human brain is highly susceptible to the suggestion of detail.
Oh, for sure.
If you attempt to meticulously paint every single leaf and branch on a distant tree line, the result often looks stiff and overworked.
It looks unnatural.
Exactly. By dragging a comb brush and a coarse bristle brush along that horizon, the tools naturally produce broken, erratic marks.
You are leveraging the chaotic nature of the bristles to imply the chaotic nature of organic growth. It creates a highly convincing illusion of a dense, uneven forest canopy with just a few deliberate strokes.
It really does.
But the curriculum highlights one crucial immediate step that must follow the placement of that dark horizon line, and it is arguably the most important move for maintaining the realism of the depth.
The diffusion.
Yes. While the paint is still wet, she takes the clean, soft, dry brush and gently diffuses the very top edge of the landmass directly into the sky.
Because a razor-sharp horizon line destroys the illusion of scale.
It ruins it.
If you leave a hard edge where the distant earth meets the sky, the painting flattens out. It starts to resemble a cheap theater set where a flat wooden cutout of a mountain is positioned directly in front of a painted backdrop.
It aggressively reminds the viewer that they are looking at a flat surface.
Precisely. In optical reality, when you look at a landmass miles in the distance, you are looking through a massive volume of the same thick, particulate-heavy atmosphere we discussed earlier. That atmosphere scatters the light, slightly blurring the edges of the distant objects and shifting their values closer to the color of the sky. By actively smudging that edge, she is physically implementing atmospheric perspective. She is pushing that dark mass miles backward into the painting.
And then, as she subsequently builds the landscape forward toward the viewer's eye, the atmospheric interference thins out.
Yes, exactly.
And that's when the palette shifts again. As she moves into the foreground, the values lighten and the chroma intensifies. You see the introduction of vibrant chrome greens, warm ochres, bluish tints, and sharp, opaque highlights.
Things come into focus.
Exactly. The edges become crisper, and the colors become warmer because there is simply less air between the viewer and the object. It completes the spatial illusion perfectly.
It is a systematic, highly controlled manipulation of the visual cortex. Every layer reinforces the depth.
So what does this all mean? For anyone analyzing this process, the critical takeaway is that executing realism is not merely an exercise in copying what is in front of you.
No, it's a construct.
It requires a fundamental understanding of the mechanics of perception. You have to deliberately reconstruct the physics of the world. You lay down the warm foundational baseline to control temperature. You ascend the atmosphere while respecting the physical dirt in the air. You harness the power of optical mixing to build luminous, transparent light. You construct the chaotic volume of vapor through deep shadows. And you anchor the entire illusion with heavy, diffused earth.
It's incredible.
I guarantee that after studying this deep dive, you will never casually glance at a passing storm cloud or a distant tree line the same way again. Understanding the invisible architecture behind the image changes how you process the physical world.
This raises an important question, though, a theoretical consideration for you as we close out this analysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent this session deconstructing a process that hinges entirely on a very specific chromatic foundation. Every optical trick, we analyzed the temperature of the blues, the glowing glazes, the harmony of the cloud highlights. All of it relied absolutely on that initial invisible layer of creamy Naples yellow.
Right, that warm baseline.
But what if, assuming the exact same landscape composition, you started by sealing the canvas in a cold, muted, desaturated green? Or What if you established an aggressive, high-chroma crimson base?
Oh, wow.
Even if you meticulously layered the exact same value structures of blues and grays over it, how would that single hidden foundational frequency alter the entire psychological weight of the piece?
It would feel completely different.
It wouldn't simply be a palette shift. It would fundamentally change the emotional narrative of the landscape.
That is a brilliant final thought to chew on. The reality that a hidden underlying frequency dictates the emotional resonance of everything built on top of it. Keep that concept in mind the next time you are analyzing a masterful painting or simply observing the shifting light in the sky above you. Thank you for joining us for this extensive breakdown. Until next time, keep analyzing the layers beneath the surface.